Welcome, everyone. Simon Rosenberg back with another great event. Joining me today is a new friend, Yassamin Ansari, who is a new Congresswoman from Arizona's 3rd District, succeeding Ruben Gallego in part of the greater Phoenix area. And welcome, Congresswoman.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm glad you're still saying new because it feels like it's been a very long 9 months.
A lifetime. Well, let's talk about that for a second, right? You have come to Congress in an extraordinary time, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have this assault on our democracy. We have Mike Johnson, the cowardly speaker, as I call him, sending everybody home for months on a time. The Epstein, you're on the Oversight Committee, which has been on the front lines of fighting them. I mean, just what's your general impression as a newbie here, right, to what you've walked into, and how are you making sense of it all?
Yeah, it's been, I've been saying like every week feels like months here. And I know I've talked to people about this. That sentiment, I think, is felt a little bit in the public as well. But just the sheer amount of insane things that are happening every single day with the Trump administration is a lot. And I think definitely unusual when it comes to how Congress operates. I think in terms of what I have been most upset by, most perplexed by, disappointed, there's an endless array of words I could use, is the way in which Republicans in Congress, led by Speaker Mike Johnson, have really abdicated their responsibility and pretty much have decided that Congress shouldn't, doesn't have the authority that it should have. It's very cult-like in the way that they are okay with, Donald Trump doing whatever it is that he wants to do, breaking the law every single day, just the corruption, the authoritarianism, and they are just letting it happen. And I think that is the part when I speak with colleagues who've been here for a lot longer, that they're, that everyone is having a hard time grappling with, because we always say, Congress should do X, but Congress isn't doing anything. Congress is just letting Donald Trump do whatever he wants and get away with it. So, yeah.
And I think that point is so important, because Mike Johnson's excuse for sending everybody home was there was nothing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that was his original rationale for why people could go home, because there was nothing to do. Meanwhile, the appropriations bills haven't been finished. We are now a month late on the fiscal 26-year budget, which is why the government's run out of money. We just saw the Senate this week vote on Trump's declaration of an economic emergency. I mean, he's got nothing to do, but we're in an economic emergency.
Right.
We've got people who are being killed lawlessly on the open seas. I mean, this whole idea that Mike Johnson could, with a straight face, claim that there was nothing for the Congress to do, and so they could go home, for months at a time. I've been here for 33 years. I've been working with House and Senate members for 33 years. And I think Mike Johnson, other than Trump, is the biggest liar and sort of most bald-faced liar and that we've seen since I've been here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the irony of the fact that he evokes God and religion in every other breath, and then moves forward with pathologically lying every single day is exactly what you described. He is very much, in bed with Trump and has decided that is how he's going to operate. And it's outrageous. And I think, I know you've had Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva on. She just broke a record that she didn't want to break in terms of the person who's gone the longest without getting sworn in after they were elected. And he doesn't seem to have any urgency in swearing her in. And that is part of the massive cover-up of the Epstein files. And I have no doubt that is a part of why Mike Johnson is refusing to swear her in.
Can you remind everybody, because I think that part of the reason that Mike Johnson doesn't want to bring people back is in part that at the end of July, there was this vote that happened, right, where Republicans, kind of when people weren't really paying attention, all of you got together and created a vote where the Republicans ended up voting with you to release the Epstein files, which I think was really this shock to Mike Johnson. And basically the Congress really he sent everybody home early, and And Congress really hasn't functioned properly since that vote. Can you just remind us about what happened with that? Because I think this was, when we look back to how we got here, I think that was a much more seminal event in the evolution of the scaredy cat, cowardly Mike Johnson being scared of his own conference, frankly, at the end of July.
I absolutely agree with you on that. So the story really kind of starts back in the beginning of the year when Trump had Pam Bondi do this whole spectacle outside of the White House saying she's going to release the Epstein files. You have these MAGA influencers with the binders. And then very quickly, within a couple of months, that story changed, right? And it became clear that Donald Trump was very resistant to accountability and having the files released and completely, now calling it a hoax. So what happened was we were pushing for accountability. And in July, in many different committees, because there's relevance in so many different committees when it comes to the Epstein files. There's financial connections that could be discussed in financial services. Of course, there's oversight connections, judiciary connections, et cetera. So Democrats started bringing up this issue whenever we could as it was relevant. And it became clear that Mike Johnson didn't want to do this. And then Thomas Massie, Ro Khanna teamed up on their discharge petition. And so Mike Johnson closed down Congress a week early before we had 1 month of August recess, which is when we go back home to our districts and work there. So he shut Congress down, right? But committee hearings continued that week. And so we continued to push. Like, for example, I was on the Education and Workforce Committee. We were having a hearing on sexual assault on college campuses. And so I wanted to introduce an amendment that simply said we should study the Epstein case and the massive sex trafficking operation when looking at sexual assault on campuses and potential cases like that. Republicans shut down the entire committee hearing for the rest of the day when they found out about this amendment. Like, that is how much they wanted to avoid any conversation about this. So there was a subpoena that came forward in a subcommittee of oversight. And because of the immense pressure from the MAGA base that's been wanting accountability for years on this issue, there were a few members of the Republican Party on that committee who voted for it. So that's when the subpoena moved forward. But of course, then Congress was closed. So the subpoena has been moving forward. The Department of Justice has been slow rolling, giving us this information. It's been months. They kind of give us, tranches at a time, oftentimes heavily redacted. In the meantime, we've had depositions with Alex Acosta, former Trump labor secretary, who was, notorious for giving Epstein the sweetheart deal. We've met with victims. A lot of progress has been made. But since then, as you rightly said, Republicans have barely been here throughout that it's been like 2 months, 3 months, and they don't work, and they have no urgency. And this is a huge part of it, because now Adelita would be the 218th signature on this discharge petition. Let's also not forget that the White House literally put out a statement and said that any Republican member signing the discharge petition would be viewed as a hostile act towards the White House. If that's not telling, I don't know what is.
Right, because if he's got nothing to hide, then why would it be a hostile?
How is it hostile?
What do you think's when the 218, when we come back, which we will at some point and hopefully soon, and I think Mike Johnson's rationale, the idea that we're not, Donald Trump has, by shutting the government down, has pushed the country into crisis. And so there's even a greater rationale for bringing the House back than there was even a month ago.
Right.
But when we come back and the 218 and discharge petition goes forward, what happens then? What makes it different from what the subpoena was, in the end of July?
I view it as an enforcement of the subpoena, because in many ways it is the same. The subpoena already is there, right? Congress has already issued a subpoena to the Department of Justice that should compel them to release the files in full, unredacted. They're not doing so. This would, of course, give it kind of the backing of the majority of Congress if it were to pass. But it would still go as well to the Senate, and so there's a challenge there. I think the most important part about all of this that I keep coming back to is that it would force Mike Johnson to put every single member of Congress, including every single member of the Republican caucus, on the record on the issue. That's what the discharge petition does. It's lingo. I'm new here, so I'm learning this different mechanisms as well. But what it's a tool that members of Congress can use when the speaker refuses to bring something to a vote or to a committee or whatever it might be. So the signatures would then mean Mike Johnson has to bring it to the floor. Everyone will have to vote for it. So therefore, Republican members of Congress will have to make a decision. Are they going to protect Donald Trump and all of the rich and powerful men that he's trying to protect? Or will they actually follow through with what many of them have been talking about for years in terms of accountability and justice for the victims? And what has been kind of rumbling under the surface is conversation around how many people feel, and Republican members have kind of been sharing on a personal level, that they feel this is when the dam will break within the caucus in terms of being forced to do something different than what the president is telling them to do.
I want to just drill down on that for a second, because I think this is super important, and I don't think it's really adequately part of the discourse. Is that my sort of explanation of what Mike Johnson is doing is because he's taking extraordinary steps. I mean, nothing like this has happened in modern history, right? Mm-hmm. And there is actually an incredible amount of work to do. We're very far away from getting the appropriations bills and the budget done. I mean, this is now potentially pushing this well into next year. It's reckless and irresponsible. But I think that for me, when I have, and my many decades here, Mike Johnson knows that he's lost control of his conference. Mm-hmm. And that's really, I think, that this is the dam that's going to break. That, and Marjorie Taylor Greene now is not going to be supportive of anything that he does in addition to Massey. And so they've lost their majority, basically. He's lost ideological control over the conference. And they're scared of what might happen next. And that when he looks impotent to Trump, it will almost certainly mean that Trump withdraws his support of him, because he won't be able to keep these guys in line. And he's acting like a very scared, high school student, as opposed to a thoughtful leader of our country. And I think that just part of what our whole theory is at Hopium is that, the dam is breaking. The cracks are emerging. We just saw the Senate this week vote 3 times to repeal Trump's tariffs, a huge rebuke to the president, the most significant congressional rebuke that's happened with Trump in this term. And because they have very narrow majorities, mm-hmm. and they've pushed a very extreme agenda, and they're asking their members to defend what I call defend the indefensible. And I think they're getting tired of it, and because many of your colleagues have to go run and sell tariffs and sell cuts to healthcare and sell the Epstein files and sell, bulldozing the East Wing and all the insanity that this guy brings every day, the largest budget deficits in American history, right? Weakening fiscal condition in the United States. And so I think that part of what you're saying, I think for people who are listening, this is really important, because it's not just about the Epstein files. It's about Trump and Johnson, basically losing control of the House, which then brings up all sorts of other nightmare scenarios for them. If we can regularly start moving things through discharge petitions, then, he's now functionally a eunuch and not a Speaker of the House any longer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what Marjorie Taylor Greene has astutely figured out is exactly this, that there is going to be a world beyond Donald Trump, and she wants to be leading that charge on the right. And I think she has been super politically astute and wise. I would never have expected it, but she's seeing it, right? She's seeing that the dam is going to break. She's seeing how deeply unpopular at the end of the day these policies are. Trump is wrecking the economy. He, even on, to me, like, I think a good reference is the fact that he's underwater even on immigration now, which is the issue that he's always been the most popular on. And he's been underwater for months because of the overreach of ICE. All of it, I think she's seeing and recognizing. And absolutely agree that I think Mike Johnson knows that his days are likely numbered, and he is doing everything he can to not just protect Trump, but protect himself, and sacrificing millions and millions and millions of Americans along the way for that power trip.
Just for time reasons, I want to get to one more thing before we go. Is you brought it up, ICE, and talk about. I've seen the work you've been doing back in your district. You have your advocacy for people who've been abducted by ICE and have been disappeared by ICE has sort of broken through into my social media feeds. You've been very effective, I think, at your public advocacy for these poor families that have been. Talk about what you're seeing at home and from on the ground in a place with a very large immigrant population.
I represent Phoenix, Arizona, a community that is largely made up of immigrants, children of immigrants, grandchildren of immigrants. It's estimated about 1 in 6 or 7 families are in a mixed status family, but the diversity is my favorite part about the community. So from the moment Trump was elected again, fear was running rampant in Arizona. From the beginning of the year, we've seen ICE terrorizing the community. The issue around detention centers in Arizona and across the United States is one that I will say for me personally has outraged me above and beyond everything else that we have seen. I've been to the detention centers in Arizona and Eloy, talked to dozens of women there. They've described horrific conditions, including lack of access to clean water, racist, dehumanizing, derogatory treatment, psychological torture. I have a constituent in the facility who has leukemia. She was a green card holder. She has been there for 6 months, lost 70 pounds, vomiting blood. I mean, the stories are endless. And Republicans just a couple of months ago in their big, ugly bill gave $40 billion more to ICE to essentially ramp up detention center capacity across the country so they can meet Stephen Miller's 3 million people per year mass deportation targets. This is one part of the story, but people in the district have been impacted at schools. Like, people are scared to send their families to school. Someone was shot by ICE in Phoenix just a couple of days ago. I mean, there is so much here, and ICE is just operating as this rogue, unchecked force. We know that the administration is giving $50,000 bonuses
That's incredible.
to hire these unqualified people with no training. It was recently reported that there were people with criminal records who were being hired. So we're basically building this army of Proud Boys. I'm just going to say it. Like, there are a lot of the deeply racist, troubled people in our community who are just animated by the racist rhetoric of Stephen Miller and Donald Trump are going to work for ICE right now. And I just think it's the biggest stain on our country's reputation, around the world. It's going to take us decades to move past this. That doesn't even begin to cover the people we've wrongly deported, ripping families apart. Later today, I'm speaking about a woman, asylum seeker who was coming here from Iran, who was just put on a plane and deported to Panama in a jungle where she's been now for months, completely alone and terrified about her future. I mean, the stories are countless. And I think the work that we have to do on ICE accountability right now as citizens is extremely important and something that everyone can play a role in.
Kristi Noem today in a press conference said 2 things that were just sort of incredible to me. First of all, she said that ICE has not detained or arrested any citizens, and that anyone who has reported that is lying and making it up, which is a pretty extraordinary statement. And then the second thing she was asked was, Governor Pritzker has asked that you not have your people out on the streets tomorrow night on Halloween, and in order to give a pause. And she said, no, we're going to be out in full force on the streets tomorrow night in Chicago on Halloween. And I don't know. as somebody who's worked on these issues for several decades and also as just a human being, right? And, my neighborhood in DC where I live is like a big Halloween neighborhood. And the joy of children on this holiday, it is the national holiday for children in many ways in America. And for her to exhibit that degree of cruelty was breathtaking today when I heard, because I watched the whole clip, I watched this extended segment she did, and it was just breathtaking.
Kristi Noem is sick. I think it's hard to rank the evilness of the people in this administration, but I put Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem at the very, very top of that list because they are just, I don't think they have an empathetic bone in their bodies.
Yeah. Well, listen, I thank you for coming on today. I just wanted, I've gotten to know you over social media because your content you're creating is breaking through. It's very powerful. You and your team are doing a phenomenal job. One of the things that we talk about here at Hopium a lot is that our leaders need to be not just legislators or governors or mayors, but communicators in this time of crisis. And you're doing an exemplary job, in my view. And so just grateful for you spending some time with us today. And keep fighting. And hopefully we can have you back in a few weeks.
Thank you, Simon. I really appreciate it. It was great chatting with you.
Thanks, everybody.